Jane Mayer has written an absolutely amazing book. It's called Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right. Her website is jane-mayer, mayer.com. And Jane, welcome to the program.
So great to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. You talk about how the Democrats and Republicans are both planning on spending roughly $1 billion this year in order to get their respective candidates elected. But there is a third group that's going to spend roughly that same amount of money. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's almost like a private plutocratic party. It's a group of about 400 to 450 multi-millionaires and billionaires who are very conservative, who've been brought together by the industrialist and billionaire Charles Koch. And this group, which calls itself the Koch Network, and it calls its members the investors, and it keeps their identity secret, that group is hoping to spend something like $889 million in this 2016 cycle, which is, I mean, the numbers, of course, get everybody dizzy at a certain point. It's hard to keep track, but there's never really been anything quite like it. They're not Democrats, they're not Republicans. They're representing the interests of their own group. It's just phenomenal.
They're representing, to be clear, they're representing the interests of maybe somewhere between 5,000 and 50,000 Americans who have a net worth of at least, well over $10 to $50 million and an annual income in excess of $1 million. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the 0.001% club or something. Yeah. But they, even though they're a tiny percentage of the American population, and maybe more importantly, they represent a tiny minority of views, they are able to use their fortunes to exert disproportionate influence and in some ways to impose their minority views on the majority. So it's really a challenge, I think, to our democracy.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I mean, you open your book back in 2009 as President Obama has been sworn in. Tell us about that.
Well, that's when this group really came together in force. This book that I've written, Dark Money, is really it's not just a contemporary political book. It's a history of who these people are and how they came together, and it goes back 40 years to when they really got going. It's a small group of people who were on the far right who poured their private fortunes into this political project, but it grew tremendously in force when Obama was elected, because so many super wealthy right-wing people looked at Obama as a threat, and he was a threat to their fortunes. He wanted to raise taxes. He was a threat to their businesses. They feared he would increase the number of regulations. After, the Bush years were pretty great for big businesses in the country, and they didn't like what they were seeing of Obama, and so they came together just right after he was inaugurated. There was a secret meeting of them, and I describe it out in Palm Springs, California, and they began planning. And their plan was, there may be a new president, but they wanted to nullify and obstruct anything that this young new president wanted to do. And the story then unfolds, follows their money, and watches as it tries to block all the things that the Obama administration was trying to do. And, I think one of the points that I'd love people to understand is this is not just about elections. It's not just about people spending money in elections, which the Supreme Court has said is fine, for better or for worse. It's about a small group of people who are waging a permanent campaign against governing. They've been trying to, from behind the scenes, hiding their hands and hiding the money trails, to really stop progress from taking place and to undermine Americans' faith in the ability of the government to get anything done.
Okay.
And so I think it's a much more comprehensive kind of permanent campaign that people, I hope, will be able to understand if they read the book.
Yeah. I mean, isn't this building on a fundamental reality that I think most Americans understood in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and ever since Reagan came out and in his first inaugural address said the problem is not the problem is government. It's not the solution to your problems; it is the problem. That understanding has largely been lost. That government can do some, and has historically done a lot of good things. And perhaps the most important point is that the only power that can balance the power of a couple of hundred billionaires worth, $1 trillion or more, we have no idea what's in their offshore accounts. The only power that can balance that is the power of all the people of the United States. In other words, the government. And thus, if they want to have absolute power, if they want to completely control what today we call the United States of America, what they may call the United States of Koch, they have to diminish the power of government in order for the billionaires to step into that power vacuum. Do I have that right?
Tom, I think that's a really good point, and not many people really grasp it, I think. And I learned about it from interviewing, for instance, there's a professor at Northwestern University named Jeffrey Winters who's done a comparative study of oligarchs around the world. And what he explains is that if you look at countries that we do not want to be like for instance, Russia, where there are oligarchs, the thing that is different about the United States that keeps the super wealthy in check is the power of the government. You need a strong government to stop corruption, because the natural tendency of oligarchs around the world is to try to use the government to serve their interests and accumulate their own wealth and protect their own wealth with, tax breaks that are beneficial to them and regulations that are beneficial to them. And it's, there's a lot of there. It's not to say that all, super wealthy people are evil, but there are people, but they have an extraordinary amount of power and naturally want to protect their perks. And in the thing that stands in between them and getting their way is usually the government, including the Justice Department, which is something that's also very important. You need the rule of law, and you need you need a balance of power. Yeah.
On April 9th, 1944, at the height of the war against the Axis powers of Germany and Japan, the New York Times asked Vice President Henry Wallace, are there American fascists? How many do we have, and how dangerous are they? And his comment, he said basically they're the rich people in this country. And then he said, and I quote, "They claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but are the spokesman for monopoly and vested interest. Their final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power, so that, using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection." That was the sitting Vice President of the United States in the New York Times in 1944. Are we there?
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Well, I think, I'm a reporter, and this is a book of fact and reporting, and I can say that I've interviewed a number of people who fear we are there, and it includes Republicans. I mean, I interviewed Mark, I have a quote from Mark McKinnon in this book, who was the political advisor to George W. Bush, and he worries about all of our...
He's a little concerned, too. Jane, can you hold on?
Sure.
Can you stay with us? Great. We have Jane Mayer with us. Her new book is called Dark Money. Stick around. Jane, you still with us?
I'm here.
Do you mind if I read you 5 or 6 sentences from Henry Wallace's piece in the New York Times in 44?
No, I mean, it sounds incredible. Of course, it's not unlike what Teddy Roosevelt was saying, some decades before. It's not a new problem.
No, it's absolutely not. And here's what Wallace had to say, and because I think this is so apropos of what I wrote a piece about this back years ago called "The Ghost of Vice President Wallace Warns It Can Happen Here." By the way, if you're ever looking for this, just Google his name and mine. The really dangerous American fascists. This, again, he's writing on the front page of the New York Times, April 9th, 1944. The really dangerous American fascists are not hooked up directly or even indirectly with the Axis. The FBI has its finger on those people. The dangerous American fascist is the man who wants to do in the United States in an American way what was done in Germany in a Prussian way. The American fascist would prefer not to use violence. His method is to poison the channel of public information. With a fascist, the problem is never how to best present the truth to the public. but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving the fascist and his group more money and more power. If we define an American fascist as one who, in case of conflict, puts money and power ahead of human beings, there are undoubtedly several million fascists in the United States. There are probably several 100,000 if we narrow the definition to include only those who, in their search for money and power, are ruthless and deceitful. They are patriotic in time of war because it's in their interest to do so, but in time of peace, they follow power and the dollar wherever they may lead. And then he says, finally, still another danger is represented by those who pay lip service to democracy and the common welfare and their insatiable greed for money and power, which money gives, do not hesitate surreptitiously to evade the laws designed to safeguard the American from monopolistic extortion. American fascists of this stamp were clandestinely aligned with their German counterparts before the war and are even now preparing to resume where they left off after the present unpleasantness ceases.
Well, interesting that it mentions that they were aligned with the Germans before the war, because one of the revelations in this book is, of course, that the father of Charles and David Koch, whose name was Fred Koch and was the founder of the family business, was actually in business with Hitler. And he built a refinery. He helped design and build a refinery that became very key to the Nazi war effort that was in Hamburg, Germany. And in order to get permission to do it, his partner had to get personally a green light from Hitler, and they did. And that refinery had to be bombed by the U.S. and the Allies over and over again. And when it was bombed, it was so important to the Germans that it was rebuilt by Nazi slave labor in between the bombings.
Yeah. He said,
it's fascinating, really. I mean, and then that's the parent of this pair of brothers, Charles and David Koch, who are so key to American politics.
I wonder if Wallace was speaking of them. I mean, he clearly was thinking, I would guess, of the Prescott Bush, but he said monopolists and fascist monopolists who fear competition and who distrust democracy because it stands for equal opportunity would like to secure their position against small and energetic enterprise. In an effort to eliminate the possibility of any rival itself growing up, monopolists would sacrifice democracy itself. It's a pretty amazing piece. But your book is much better, and I want to get back to the details on your book when our entire radio audience rejoins us in about 10 seconds. And we will continue with this conversation. If that's all right with you, Jane, you're still around?
That'd be great.
Okay, stick around. Jane Mayer is with us. We'll be right back. Jane Mayer is with us. She is the author of Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right. Jane-Mayer.com is her website. Jane, you mentioned one of the first major, we got to do something, let's throw our money together and make this happen, meetings down in Florida of the Koch network right after Obama was elected. Are you familiar with the January 20th, 2009 meeting at the Caucus Room restaurant when the group of Republican legislators got together while President Obama was dancing with his wife? It was the night he was inaugurated.
Yes, that was the corollary in Congress, which is what happens when the Republicans in Congress, and I describe some of this too in the book, get together and decide that they need to obstruct Obama. And that is pretty much what unfolds. You know, there was never a moment really of cooperation. And I interviewed Bill Burton, who was working in the Obama White House. He says that that they were attacked so fast that the chairs were still spinning in the White House from the people who'd gotten out of them. From the previous administration. They I think did not see it coming, really, because Obama was talking during the campaign about, no red America, no blue America, just one America. And in fact, he got clobbered by this small group of obstructionists very fast.
Well, Pete Sessions said, Taliban insurgency. We've learned how to disrupt an entire person's process. We need to understand that insurgency may be required when dealing with the other side. He said, we're going to adapt the Taliban's policy. He said, we will then become an insurgency. Kevin McCarthy said, we're going to challenge them on every single bill, show united and unyielding opposition to the president's policies, even policies that we may have proposed in the past. It's truly astonishing.
It is astonishing, and it's radical, and that's why the book is called, The Hidden History of the Rise of the Radical Right, because it's not ordinary business what's been going on, and people sort of forget it. I mean, there've always been disputes between Republicans and Democrats in our times, but this is really something different, and this is something that's meant to. The real purpose, I think, and certainly the agenda of the big funders like the Kochs, is to undermine Americans' faith in government, that it can do anything. I mean, I got interested in it because I wanted to know why the government was so dysfunctional. Why can't it do something about global warming? Why can't Congress take action? And the reason is it's tied up in knots by the money from huge fossil fuel interests and other big interests that are purposely trying to keep it from doing anything. I mean, One of the quotes I love in this book is from a Republican aide on the Hill who's talking about how gridlock is our best friend because they don't want to do anything about global warming.
Yeah, there are two stories in today's media that seem apropos of this, and I'd love to get your take on it and how this relates to what your book Dark Money writes about. The first is from Huffington Post, Politics by Judy Badowski. She says 4 of America's wealthiest businessmen laid the foundation for Ted Cruz's now surging Republican presidential candidate. And then she lays out how these 4 billionaires got together and threw $36 million early on into Cruz's campaign. They're now paying for all his ads. They sponsored 2 weekend rallies along with Glenn Beck. They basically think they're going to be in the catbird seat when he becomes president. And then on the other side, a super PAC founded by former TD Ameritrade executive Joe Ricketts is spending more than $600,000 on a television ad in Iowa, lashing Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont as too liberal right now as we speak. So here we've got TD Ameritrade, and by the way, if you have your 401k or any other accounts in that company, well, whatever. You got, TD Ameritrade's former executive Joe Ricketts pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars against Bernie, and then you got these 4 wealthy families in Texas throwing $36 million behind Ted Cruz. Do we have any resemblance to? I mean, aren't we starting to look like Zimbabwe here?
Well, that's the fear for sure. I mean, one of the big fortunes behind Ted Cruz is a man whose story I tell in the book, and that's Bob Mercer, who is a hedge fund manager from Long Island and worth untold amounts of money, and he's got extraordinarily strange views of things. He's been also financing research into how to live forever, and he doesn't believe in global warming, and he is pouring money into Cruz, and he's been a major part of the Koch network. And what the Kochs do for someone like that is they provide a structure. They've got the operatives who can take these fortunes and channel them efficiently into our system so that they get maximum impact.
Wow. So where, I know about the pushback at Move to amend the Constitution so that we can finally pass some laws to get campaign finance back, because a lot of this was most of this, in fact, was created by the Supreme Court. If we go back to 1976, the Buckley case, or even all the way back to 1886, the Santa Clara case, and obviously Citizens United. What do we do about this, Jane? We got a couple of minutes here left.
Well, I mean, I think one answer is what Bernie is doing, which is getting as many small donors together as you possibly can so that they have their own kind of throw weight. But I really think, I mean, my book's called Dark Money, and one of the things that we absolutely have to do, and as a reporter I feel very strongly about it, is get transparency. You've got to know, people in this country have got to know where this money's coming from and what the people who are spending it want.
Well, that's what Kennedy said in the Citizens United decision. Well,
he said there would be transparency.
Right.
Of course, he could not have been more wrong.
Right.
And critics said so right at the time. And even Scalia, a conservative justice like Scalia said, the big check on corruption in this country is going to be transparency. And there isn't transparency. So there is no check on this corruption. And reporters like me are struggling to try to follow the money and get it out there so the public can see it. But there are so many tricks and games being played. I mean, this is like the Cayman Islands only for politics.
Yeah. We need another church commission. I'm telling you, this is nuts. Jane Mayer, an absolutely brilliant book. Go out and get a copy right now. You're going to want to read this. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right is the book. There'll be links on our website and in our newsletters tonight. Her website, jane-mayer, M-A-Y-E-R.com. Jane, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
And thank you for writing this book. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.